Dan and Amy, with the violence still plaguing big cities around the country, New York, Chicago, Portland in particular, right now, but not limited to them. President Trump said an announcement is coming next week about something he plans to do about that violence, whether some of those big city mayors want his help or not.
Something that I think at this point the American people want to see. They've been run very poorly, these cities, whether it's Seattle, where we were getting ready to go in and they decided to go in, and that's good. Minneapolis, where we had the National Guard go in, and as soon as they did that, we straightened that mess out. They should have been able to do it locally with their police. Their police are good. They were told not to do anything. Or many other cases. We're doing a great job in Portland. Portland was very rough, and they called us in, and we did a good job, to put it mildly. Many people in jail right now. But we have other cities that are out of control. They're like war zones. And if the city isn't going to straighten it out, if local politicians, or in this case, I don't say this for political reasons, they're all Democrats. They're liberal, left-wing Democrats. And it's almost like they think this is going to be this way forever. Where in Chicago, 68 people were shot and 18 died last week. We're not going to put up with that. We're not going to put up with that. So that's for our next discussion.
So we'll be interested to hear what may be forthcoming when Bret Baier joins us momentarily. One other thing, though, just in terms of the resistance he'll get from big city mayors.
Yeah.
I think what Mayor Warren Wilhelm had to say this week is an indication of the kind of resistance. They don't even recognize there's a problem. Listen to Bill de Blasio.
We now have fewer people in our jails than any time since World War II. And we are safer for it and better for it.
Really?
A headline from NBC4 in New York City from July 1st. NYC homicides soared 21% in first 6 months of 2020, shootings up 46%. And he's arguing that the metric is the prison population and that we're safer and better for it. Well, demonstrably, New York City is not safer and better for it. I mean, that's some sort of corollary to the Fox Butterfield effect that we're witnessing from de Blasio. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Bret Baier, Fox News anchor, special report, 5 p.m. Chicago time during the week, and the author of the #1 bestseller, 3 Days at the Brink, FDR's Daring Gamble to Win World War II. Bret, thanks for being with us.
Good morning.
Do you have any indication from those little birdies that visit you inside the Beltway what the president plans for next week as it pertains to violence in big U.S. cities?
No, not yet, but there's definitely an indication that there's a federal action that's pending. You know, he just held a little bit of a Q&A with the press and the Oval Office and with the Attorney General about going after MS-13, that gang that has murdered and caused all kinds of violence, especially in the Northeast, but not limited to there. And they captured the leader and going after the death penalty in charging him. So I think that they're going to continue down this road of law and order, and what that looks like as far as the different cities that are really problematic. I don't know yet. I mean, obviously you have Portland, who the mayor has said, and the governor has said, the federal officials are inciting the violence, whereas, you know, every night there's some kind of protest that turns violent.
Yeah, it's a very different position than you receive from watching what's happening, from hearing from other voices in Portland that perhaps are a little bit less ideological and less Trump-focused, as well as from police officers in Portland. There was a good interview from a police officer in Portland describing exactly what's happening. And interestingly, too, he describes how it's, he's a black officer, and he talks about when he has young black people come up and they want to talk to him, and why don't you talk to me? And every time what he says, every time he starts to engage some black resident of Portland, some white person runs up and intercedes like it's organized effort to keep black officers from talking to black people and being constructive in any way.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad. It's sad when fighting violence and supporting police departments is somehow political. I think Joe Biden is trying to get through there saying, I am not for defunding police, but he is for, supporting some things that have raised questions, which is why the National Association of Police Organizations, which endorsed Biden and Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, endorsed President Trump this year.
But do you think there's a growing recognition, particularly among sophisticated groups like that police organization, says, you know what, we've known Joe Biden for a long time, and Joe Biden may be saying one thing, but I see everyone around Joe Biden, and I see, sort of how much control Joe Biden really has of the situation. And I know it's not going to be Joe Biden making those decisions, or if he is, it's going to be heavily influenced by these other elements that are serious when they talk about defunding police. People like the Berkeley City Council, which just, I think first in the nation, just took traffic stops away from police and are using unarmed civilian city workers.
Yeah, I think that there's a real concern about basically commanding control of the Biden operation and what it would look like as President Biden, and that's raising its head. I think that this issue is a big issue. I do think that COVID in this current environment has trumped it, as hard as that is to believe. Now, in those individual cities, that may not be the case, but overall in the nation, it is the case. And, and the same thing is happening with going back to school. The Democratic parents want their kids to go back to school, but for the political issue, because the president has pushed for going back to school, suddenly it's there's this pushback.
I always wonder if President Trump had said, no, I do not want schools to reopen, if all the Democratic governors and mayors would say, oh, no, now we need to open it.
Yeah, it's true. It is true. Dr. Fauci has said the default position is open up the school, go back. But in different cities or places that are having tough times, you got to figure out mitigation efforts, whether it's masks or social distancing or staggering or a hybrid situation. But go get the kids back to school.
Give them some
and that's Fauci.
And we're right, but it's just so, it's shockingly complicated politically, even though the science, as Kayleigh McEnany said yesterday, is clearly on the side of reopening, even though her saying that was
context.
was mispresented by some in the media. Of course it was. But Bethany Mandel has a piece in the Washington Examiner. Suburban white women are key voters in a lot of key swing states. And she writes, and you know what suburban women want? They want their children in school and learning. They don't want them sitting in front of a computer screen presenting to learn on Zoom. Suburban mothers don't want to be forced to make the choice between their jobs and financial stability and their children's education. And I suspect that's true. That's perfectly commonsensical. But then a lot of those same suburban women have such antipathy to Trump, it's unclear to see if Trump benefits by pushing for school reopening, even as their local officials are pushing for distance learning.
You're right. I just think that Democrats who push back, there might be a flip of this. I mean, Europe and some places that had spikes managed to get their kids back in school
without masks.
And even if you have to do masks, isn't it better to get them back to school?
Oh yeah, no, I agree.
I think that I just don't think this is a political issue, and I think it's dangerous when it becomes one.
Well, but has any other essential group fought back like teachers have? I don't remember doctors, nurses, grocery store workers standing up and saying they're not going to work until a vaccine has been approved.
Right. No, that's true. They haven't. And I think that there's a real push. The vaccine's not going to happen before Election Day, but there may be some therapeutics that become extra successful. This is beyond the blood plasma that people are going to be asked to donate if you've had coronavirus. But I think that there are some really cutting-edge therapeutics that may take down the hospitalizations, if not the cases, the hospitalizations and the fear of the death.
Well, with respect to what Amy mentioned about the pushback from teachers as compared to other professions.
It's
Well,
unprecedented.
there's a big distinction, isn't there? And doctors and grocery workers, grocery store workers, and some of those other
Big
frontline
box
employees that
stores.
went back to work don't have the teachers' union to fall back on. They don't have the luxury, generally speaking, of saying, "I'm going to dictate the terms on which I work, and I'm going to be paid per a CBA, whether I do or not. I own the politicians that are making the decisions, so I'm completely insulated." That's not the case for those other professions, and I wonder if, particularly the LA Teachers Union, here are all our demands to come back to work: Medicare for all, $500 billion from the federal government for K through 12 and state governments, and Green New Deal, and all these other things that are completely separate and distinct from educating children. Those were their demands to come back. They knew they couldn't be met, so now they have remote learning. I wonder if this is a moment where, again, zeroing in on those bad actors, as I'm characterizing them, and talking a little bit about K through 12 education generally and the union's control of K through 12 education, particularly in these big cities, but also in a lot of suburban communities.
Well, I think that's fair, and I think it's on the issue of education, which often doesn't get delved into in a presidential campaign as much as it should. That will come up this time. I was struck by this MSNBC piece. I don't know if you've seen it, where they had 6 or so medical experts and and infectious disease experts, and they went down the row saying, "Would you send your kids to school now?" And they went down and said, "Yes, yes,
All of them.
yes,
Yep.
yes, yes, yes." And they went back to the anchor,
And
he
he's
was like,
scared.
"Wow, they all said yes."
Right.
That didn't fit their narrative, Bret Baier.
Right. So I think that, we just have to be careful. If you're going to say, let the science run the day, okay, let's do it. Let's see where it goes.
Hey, we have 15 weeks until the election. Any idea, thing that you're hearing who Biden is going to choose as his running mate?
Well, it's all over the map. I think that, just this week I heard that Elizabeth Warren is back in the mix, that the Biden people are calling key African-American supporters to say, how would this sit with you? If that's true, it changes the dynamic, obviously. But leading prior to that, I think, was Val Demings and Karen Bass. I think that there was a fear in the Biden camp that this is what has been reported, that Kamala Harris may outshine him in the big picture, and that's something that Biden doesn't want.
That's interesting.
What about Tom Friedman last week in the New York Times? I don't know if it was a trial balloon or if it was something that had been more focus group tested, but proposed that Biden should essentially back out of the debates unless 2 stipulations are met. One is that there be a fact-checking panel that would have the last 10 minutes of the debate to go after all of the review all the statements made by both candidates and say which was true and which wasn't, which is really, really interesting. And
that might not have worked for Obamacare.
Yeah, right. But also, and he also wants to limit the number of debates to less than 3. So the question is, do they see that as the only wild card preventing a Biden victory? And so they're either going to try and get him out of the debates or get him more help on the debate stage?
I think that's a factor, and I definitely have heard that is being considered, like all of those stipulations, to, again, make it a poison pill and say, well, we just can't do it. But you can do that maybe if it is truly 10 to 15 point lead. But if, as we suspect, that there is some, like the internals of these campaigns show it at about maybe 5 points, and that's nationally, not in battleground states.
Right.
If it's less than the big lead, I'm not sure. I think he could lose significant points from independents who say, listen, I need to see my president debate.
Absolutely. Before we let you go, last thing, Kudlow and Mnuchin, Charlie Gasparino over at Fox Business reporting that there's a bit of an internal struggle over what form the next disaster relief / stimulus bill should take. Kudlow wants payroll tax cut, as does Laffer and Steve Moore and the Free Marketeers. And Mnuchin doesn't think it gets through the House, and so he just wants to send out another round of checks, as well as extend the enhanced unemployment benefits, which would be really disastrous, I think, and also something the president said he wouldn't do. So what's your handle on what's going to come out of the White House in terms of the next bill?
I think there's internal push and pull, and they don't have a lot of leeway with the House. And I think Mnuchin's point is we need to move now. The closer you get to election, the tougher it is to get big things through, even if it's an emergency situation. So there are already some Republicans pushing back on a number of the big ticket items. So I suspect it's going to be next week that they start to formulate what it looks like.
He is Bret Baier, Fox News anchor. Excuse me, special report, 5 p.m. Chicago time during the week. Number one best-selling author of 3 Days at the Brink, FDR's Daring Gamble to Win World War II. Bret, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.